For 7 years, I went to sleep every night convinced my life was perfect. Stable job, a recently renovated 2-bedroom, and a wife who was beautiful, calm, and never made a fuss. No drama, no meltdowns, no frantic calls asking, "Where are you and who are you with?" Guys at work envied me, and I'd just shrug, thinking, yeah, I got lucky, but that's just how it is sometimes, right? But that's not how it is, because one evening, I finally understood a simple truth. There are 2 kinds of quiet in a home. One where people are so content together that words aren't necessary, and another where there's nothing left to say, and no one left to say it to. I'd been living in the second kind of quiet for 3 years, mistaking it for the first. Saturday, the old industrial park off Route 97.
The smell of gas hung heavy, sun warmed the corrugated steel, and flies buzzed lazily near the rafters. I was tinkering with my dad's old Harley Sportster. He bought it back in the 80s. After he passed, I brought it here, and for 3 years I'd been trying to get it running right. Not that I planned to ride it, just something to tinker with, clear my head. Beside me, perched on some old crates, were Tony from the next bay and old Mike, a retiree whose garage was more of a pickle jar warehouse than a place for a car. The conversation, as usual, drifted to women. Tony was complaining that his Brenda checked his phone every single night, sat right there on the couch, scrolling through it in front of him.
Old Mike chuckled, saying his Patricia once showed up at his rig site unannounced, drove 300 miles on a Greyhound bus because he hadn't called for 2 days. I just listened and smirked because I couldn't even imagine that kind of drama. My Anna, in 7 years of marriage, had never once, not a single time, pulled a jealousy stunt. Not when I stayed late at work till midnight, not when I went fishing with the guys overnight, not even when I liked old classmates' photos on Facebook. 0 reaction. I told Tony all this. My wife, man, she doesn't even ask where I'm going. Just a nod, and that's it. Tony stared at me like I was an alien. Old Mike grunted and said something like, either she's a saint or she just doesn't give a damn. I just laughed it off. Doesn't give a damn? Come on, we've been together for 7 years. Everything's solid, got our routines down, no issues. Old Mike just shrugged and reached for another pickle jar. Tony shook his head, muttering that he envied me. And honestly, in that moment, I really felt like a king. A man whose home was quiet and peaceful. Not because my wife was some meek doormat. No, Anna's got a strong personality. She's a nail tech at a busy salon, has her own clients, her own money, her own life. She was just a gift. No jealousy, no drama. That evening, I got home to our 2-bedroom on Maple Avenue, freshly renovated. We'd taken out a big home equity loan about 18 months ago, but it was worth it. We finally got everything just the way we wanted. Or really, just the way I wanted.
Anna had told me, just do what you think is best. She was on the couch, legs tucked under her, phone in hand. Some show was paused on the TV. I walked in, kicked off my shoes, and checked the kitchen. Dinner was ready. Meatloaf in the oven, mashed potatoes on the stove. Just like always. I ate, rinsed my plate, and headed into the living room, right back to her screen. That was it. Not a single question. No who's going, no what time. I used to tell myself, why bother? It's just how things are. I think, well, there's the beauty again. But now, I'm trying to remember.
When we first got married, she'd meet me at the door, hugging me like I'd just returned from war, not the office. She'd leave notes on the fridge with silly drawings. She might call in the middle of the day just to ask how I was, her voice warm enough to melt winter. She cooked, not out of obligation, but out of joy, just to make me smile. Once, she even baked a cake shaped like a steering wheel because I just got my driver's license. Now the fridge is full, the food is good, the apartment is clean, everything's neat and tidy. But there are no notes, no hugs, no calls in the middle of the day. When did it all fade? I couldn't pinpoint a specific moment. It was like water slowly draining from a bathtub, and you sit there, not noticing, because the water's still warm around you.
Before bed, I checked my phone. Mike had sent a text. "Bro, don't forget about that debt. Time to settle up." I read it, grimaced, and put the phone on my nightstand. I owed him $20,000. It was an old story. About 4 years ago, he'd connected me with an acquaintance of his, a car wash owner. I needed a first major client for my agency.
Mike asked for $20,000 for the lead, a sort of commission. I'd agreed verbally back then. Man to man, I'll pay you back once I get on my feet. I did get on my feet, but that $20,000 somehow always went to other things. Repairs, the mortgage, just life. Mike would remind me about it every 6 months or so. I'd joke it off, and he didn't push too hard. But in the last month, his tone had shifted. I went to bed.
Anna came into the bedroom when I was already drifting off to sleep. I heard her quietly lie down on her side. The mattress barely stirred, like there was no one beside me. Our wedding photo stood on the dresser. In the morning, as I was getting ready, I noticed the frame was turned, not facing the wall, but slightly to the side. Probably when Anna wiped the dust, she nudged it and didn't fix it. No big deal. I brushed it off. Honestly, at that moment, everything felt pretty stable. At work, I was given a new client to manage, a car dealership, a big client with serious money. My boss, Mr. Johnson, said directly in the meeting, "Dave, this is your chance. Don't mess this up." After the meeting, Lisa lingered. She's our content manager, 29 years old.
She's sharp, a redhead, always with a coffee in hand. She asked if I was going to the company party on Friday. I shrugged. If the boss insists. She just laughed. The boss already spoke. The client will be there, and you're practically ordered to go. We shared a laugh and went our separate ways. No big deal. That evening, driving home, I thought my life at 35 was turning out okay. Far from perfect. The mortgage was a killer. Mike's debt was hanging over me. But overall, I couldn't complain too much. I had a job, a calm wife, a roof over my head, a car, not new, but it ran. What more does a man need? I parked, went up to the 3rd floor, and opened the door. Silence. The TV was off. Anna was in the kitchen, reheating something. She asked briefly, "Dinner?"
I already ate. She went into the living room. I stayed in the kitchen, finishing up, looking out the window at the yard, the playground, the street lamp. I thought everything was under control. I went to bed with that thought. Idiot. Friday crept up fast. The company party was at a restaurant just outside of town. Not fancy, but not a dive either. The banquet hall on the 2nd floor, long tables arranged in a U-shape, music blasting from a speaker, a waitress with a weary expression. Our agency is small, maybe 20 people, but with clients and spouses, we were pushing 40. I really didn't want to go. It was Friday, I was exhausted, and frankly, I'm not a big fan of these office shindigs. But Frank Johnson, our CEO, called me personally and made it crystal clear. David Miller, the big-shot car dealer, would be there, and I needed to schmooze him, solidify the contact. Fine, it's work, just work. I texted Anna to let her know I'd be late, corporate event. She replied with a single word, "Don't drink and drive." That was it. No, can I come with you? No, who's going to be there? No, what time will you be home? Even then, I remember thinking, that's what I love about her. At the restaurant, I sat next to David Miller. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy, the type who could tell if you were blowing smoke or talking real business. We talked project details, budgets, timelines. He thought out, started cracking jokes, even clapped me on the shoulder a couple of times. Things were progressing well. We each had 3 shots. I cut myself off after that. I was driving. David Miller left early, his wife was waiting, and I finally relaxed. Then the crowd was getting pretty loose. The music got louder, people were dancing, Dave from sales was telling dirty jokes. Then Lena appeared. She'd had a fair bit to drink by then. Not blackout drunk, but definitely high-spirited. She plopped down next to me, started rambling about her vacation, something about Cancun, how she lost her passport at the airport. She was hilarious. I listened, joked back, just normal work chatter. And then there was this moment. She was laughing at something. Shoving a woman away in front of everyone, especially after sitting next to a big client all evening, felt wrong. Awkward. I just sort of leaned away, reaching for a glass of water. But someone managed to snap a pic. Maria from accounting, our resident amateur photographer. She'd been taking pictures of everyone all night, like she was working a wedding. And it was that exact shot. Lena pressed close to me, and me sitting there with a face you couldn't quite read, whether I was pleased or just stunned. That picture went straight into the main company chat. Our company chat is open to everyone. Colleagues' wives aren't on it, but accounting always duplicates event photos to the general group chat, for posterity, for reporting, for team morale.
as Frank likes to say. Dave's phone was the first to blow up.
His wife, Brenda, a real firecracker, saw the photo and immediately assumed it was Dave with some other woman. Dave wasn't even in the picture. He was outside smoking at the time. But for Brenda, it was enough that it was a company party and women were present. She called and raised such a ruckus that Dave stormed out of the hall, beet red, yelling into his phone across the whole parking lot that he was completely sober and hadn't been sitting next to anyone. Everyone had a laugh. Then 2 more phones started ringing. Wives had seen the pictures, demanding answers. Some guys grumbled, others tried to explain themselves. A totally normal scene for any company party in any city. But my phone stayed silent. I waited. Not consciously maybe, but subconsciously, I guess.
An hour passed. Silence. 2 hours. Nothing. No call, no text, not even an emoji. 0. Finally, I texted her myself. Running late. Company party. Work stuff. The reply came 3 minutes later. 1 word. Okay. 1 word. No period. No exclamation mark. Nothing. It was as if I'd simply announced we were out of milk. I got home well past midnight, slipped off my shoes quietly, and peeked into the bedroom. Anna was asleep, or pretending to be. I couldn't tell. I lay down beside her, staring up at the ceiling. Usually, I'd be out cold in a minute. Her stillness usually reassured me that everything was okay, that our home was safe. But tonight, something felt off. Steve's words from that time in his garage echoed in my head. Maybe she just doesn't care anymore. I pushed the thought away and eventually drifted off. In the morning, I got up, made coffee, and went into the kitchen. Anna was already there, getting ready for work. She was eating a breakfast bar and sipping her green tea. I sat across from her, waiting. Maybe she'd ask about the office party. Maybe she'd say, "Did you see the photo?" Or at least meet my gaze with a question in her eyes. Nothing. She finished her tea, placed the mug in the sink, and mentioned she'd be home late. A client appointment, she said, and then she was gone. The front door clicked shut, softly, silently, just like always. I logged into the company chat. The photo was still there.
Lisa was practically plastered against me, and I had this goofy grin on my face. Underneath, there were laughing emojis, woeful comments, and fire symbols. Anna was in that chat group. I'd added her a couple of years back when the agency hosted a family picnic. I checked. She was online last night at 11:40 p.m. The photo had been posted at 11:10 p.m. She saw it, definitely saw it, and nothing. At the office on Monday, everyone was buzzing about the fallout. Dave's wife, Olivia, wasn't speaking to him until Wednesday. Art, from the design team's wife, demanded access to his work email. Kyle's wife deleted every female contact from his phone, including his mom. The guys were either grumbling or cracking up. Just a typical Monday after an office party.
But I stayed silent, because strangely, I had nothing to complain about. My wife hadn't called, hadn't texted, hadn't asked, hadn't shown an ounce of jealousy. She just hadn't reacted at all. And for the first time, that wasn't a good feeling. It felt cold, like a chill. I can't quite describe it. After work, I swung by Steve's place. He was tinkering in his garage with some wiring. He's an electrician, so his garage is always a jungle of wires and electrical tape. I gave him the Cliff's Notes version of the office party, just that there was a photo. Everyone else's wives went ballistic, but mine? Crickets. Steve listened, twirling a screwdriver in his hand. Then he looked at me, letting his words drop slow and heavy, like stones into a well.
"Maybe she just doesn't care anymore, man," he said. "Maybe it's not about trust, buddy, but about her just not giving a damn." That hit me like a splash of ice water. I snapped back. "You're just jealous. Natalie tracks your every move, but I am a free man in my marriage." Steve held up his hands. All right, he said, "whatever you say." But his eyes weren't hurt, more like a man who knows something he won't put into words. I left. In my rearview mirror, I saw him pull out his phone and start dialing someone. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I ate dinner alone at home. Anna came home later. "Client ran late," she explained. She changed, then sat down at the kitchen counter, microwaved something. I asked her how her day was. "Fine. Just tired." I tried to tell her about the new contract with the car dealership, how things were finally moving forward, and that Mr. Johnson seemed like a decent guy. Anna listened, nodding occasionally,
but it felt like she was just hearing background noise, like the radio playing in another room. The words were there, but they weren't landing. Then she went into the living room and turned on her show. I stayed in the kitchen. I washed the few dishes, then slowly wiped down the counters. I stood at the window, staring out at the courtyard below. A street lamp cast a soft glow on a bench. It was a warm May evening. Somewhere downstairs, a guy was walking his dog. Where was that music coming from? The world was moving on, and I just stood there, trying to pinpoint what had gotten to me.
I couldn't articulate it. It was just a feeling, like walking into your apartment and sensing something's off, but you can't quite put your finger on what it is. I went to bed. Anna was already there, facing the wall. In the early years, she'd always fall asleep facing me. I couldn't remember when that stopped. I closed my eyes. Tomorrow was a work day. I needed to get some sleep, focus on business, on the project, on the mortgage, on Mike's loan, all the things a normal guy keeps straight. But my mind was stuck on something else. One word. Okay. No period. Just okay. After the office party, I started seeing Anna differently. Not on purpose, not like some detective. It was just something Mike had said, and now every gesture she made passed through a new filter.
Take this morning. She was making oatmeal for herself in the kitchen and fried eggs for me, all in silence. Before, I'd have thought, well, she's tired, it happens. But now I noticed, she's not quiet because she's tired. She's quiet because she has nothing to say to me, or she doesn't want to. It's a huge difference, and I hadn't seen it before. I tried to remember the last time Anna had approached me on her own, just to hug me, without a reason. When she'd kissed me not just on autopilot before I left, but truly. When she'd asked how my day was and genuinely waited for an answer. I couldn't recall. Not a single specific moment in maybe the last 2, maybe 3 years. A memory lapse? No, not a lapse. There was simply nothing to remember. Meanwhile, at work, everything was going sideways. Mr. Sterling, the car dealer I'd charmed so well at the office party, turned out to be a real pain. He didn't like the ad campaign concept. Too young, he'd said. My clients aren't riding skateboards, they're family men, over 40. Redo it. I sat down to redo it and completely screwed up the presentation. Mixed up slides, put in wrong figures from a past project. Mr. Davies called me into his office, looked at me over his glasses and said nothing. Then, quietly, he asked if everything was all right. I said yes, just hadn't slept well. He nodded, like, okay, but there wouldn't be a second chance with this client. Driving home, I knew I had to do something. Not about work, I'd sort that out, but about home, about Anna. I decided to make a proper dinner, like we used to. Stopped by the grocery store, bought a nice cut of roast, some fresh vegetables, a bottle of red wine. She used to love red. I cooked for about an hour and a half, roasted the meat in the oven, tossed a salad, even found a dusty candle in a drawer and put it on the table. It didn't look like a restaurant meal, of course, more like the attempt of a guy who cooks maybe twice a year. But I tried. Anna came home from work, saw the table, paused for a second in the kitchen doorway, then smiled, politely, carefully, like a colleague thanking you for a birthday cake. She thanked me, sat down, ate, complimented the roast, and asked what the occasion was. I said, no occasion, just felt like it. She nodded.
Finished her meal, washed her plate, thanked me again, and went into the living room. A minute later, I heard the TV show start. I sat there. I sat at the table with a candle and a bottle of wine, from which I'd had a single glass. The candle was burning down, wax dripping onto the tablecloth. I cleared the table, poured the rest of the wine down the drain, snuffed out the stub. Some romantic I am. The next day, I called my mom. Martha lives in the suburbs, in the house I grew up in. She's been alone since Dad passed. Sharp as a tack, one of those women who sees everything, but only speaks when you ask, and even then, not right away. We chatted about her blood pressure, her garden, the neighbor's cat that had dug up her flower bed again.
Then, as if an afterthought, she asked how long it had been since Anna and I had gone out together, to the movies, to the park, Or even just for a walk? I froze. I honestly couldn't remember. The last time we'd gone anywhere together was probably New Year's Eve at Steve and Nancy's, and even that was with a crowd, not just the two of us. Mom paused, then quietly, gently added, I told you 2 years ago that Anna seemed a little sad. You said she was just tired from work back then, remember? I didn't. I checked my old texts, found it. Sure enough, Mom had written, Honey, how's Anna? She seemed off to me when you visited. I'd replied with a single line, Mom, everything's fine. She's just tired. Don't make things up. 2 years ago, I'd brushed off her concern like a bothersome fly.
Maybe she was the only one who noticed anything back then. After talking to Mom, I decided to just ask her directly. That evening, as Anna sat in the kitchen, scrolling on her phone, I pulled up a chair opposite her and asked straight out, Are we okay? She looked up, her eyes calm, even, like a windowless lake. She answered in the same flat tone one might use for the weather report. Yes, everything's fine. I fumbled for words. I don't know, I said, just asking. She shrugged, murmured, Everything's normal, don't worry, and went back to her phone. That everything's normal hit me like a ton of bricks, because normal meant all of this, the silence, the politeness, our parallel existence, and she either considered it normal or she was pretending. The moment she buried her face back in the screen, I glanced over. On the screen was a website for apartment rentals, studio apartments, downtown area, average prices. I managed to catch it before she scrolled past. I figured she must be looking for a friend. Maybe Nancy's sister was moving, or a client had asked her to find something. You never know. I didn't ask, didn't want to pry. It felt awkward. A couple of days later, Steve called again. This time, it wasn't a text. It was a phone call. His voice was all business, none of his usual joking around. Man, $7.5 grand is $7.5 grand. I need that money myself. Nancy just paid for some courses. The roof on my cabin is leaking.
You've been stringing me along for 1.5 years now. I told him I'd pay part of it next month after my next paycheck. He was silent for a moment, then snapped, Fine, but just remember, I've waited long enough, and hung up. It stung. But to be honest, he was right. A debt's a debt, even if it was just a handshake deal. A man makes a promise, a man should keep it. Only between my mortgage and Steve's $7.5 grand, things were tight financially, to put it mildly. No room to breathe. My salary was decent, but after deductions for the mortgage, utilities, the car, and daily expenses, there wasn't much left. Couldn't sleep that night. I went to the kitchen, sat by the window. Outside, the courtyard was quiet. Just a street lamp and an empty bench. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. I sat there, thinking, but not about the debt or about Mike. For a week now, I'd been trying to pinpoint the problem in my marriage, and I couldn't. Not because there wasn't one, but because it was too big, too ingrained, like the whole house had settled 2 inches on its foundation. You walk on a crooked floor every day and don't notice because you get used to it. Then someone from the outside says, your floor's crooked, and suddenly you start to see it. But what exactly was crooked, I still couldn't grasp. We went fishing that Saturday. Mike picked me up at 5 a.m. It was still dark. We threw our rods, a thermos, and a tent into his old pickup and headed for the river. It really was a good spot. The bank sloped gently, a quiet cove, trees overhanging the water. Mike's buddy, a park ranger, had cleared out a little spot here, even built a fire pit with rocks. We set up our rods, got a fire going. Morning mist clung to the river. The air smelled of damp earth and wood smoke. Perfect. For the first hour, we just sat in silence, like real men do when they're fishing. Then Mike pulled out a flask. Cheap whiskey, but out here, it tasted like premium. We each took a swig. After the second, Mike started to unwind. He talked about work, about the foreman riding his ass, about the new order for the plant. Then he smoothly transitioned to Sarah and her psychology classes. Said there was no living with her now. She analyzed everything, dissected every word.
A wife who's a therapist? That's a life sentence. Then he took another drink and let it slip. Sarah, he said, was tight with my Anna. They talked every week, and Sarah had recently told him that Anna had dropped a line like, "I've gotten used to living alone, even though I'm married." I froze, my coffee mug halfway to my mouth. Mike saw my face and immediately started backpedaling. You know how women talk. Don't read into it. Maybe Sarah misunderstood. But it was too late. The words were out. I pressed him. What else did she say? Mike hedged, said Sarah had sworn him to secrecy. She'd rip his head off if she found out he'd spilled the beans. I pushed harder. We're out here on the river. Nobody for miles, just us two guys.
Tell it to me straight. Mike fiddled with his flask for a moment, then answered. He said Sarah was convinced there was something serious going on in my family. Not cheating, not fights, but something worse. That Anna had just checked out a long time ago. And that he, Mike, figured it was the right thing to do, man to man, even if Sarah killed him for it later. We sat by the fire, the coals crackling. My fishing rod twitched, but I didn't move. I pulled out my phone and called Anna. It rang and rang, but she didn't pick up. Figures, I thought. She's probably still asleep. It is Saturday morning. An hour later, I called again. She answered. Her voice was groggy. She said she'd been in the shower, hadn't heard it. Before, I wouldn't have noticed, wouldn't have thought twice.
Who cares if she was in the shower? But this time it snagged me. Why was she in the shower right when I called? Or did she just not want to pick up? We drove back in silence. It felt like forever. Mike was at the wheel. I just stared at the road. Then, without turning his head, he brought up money. Casually, as if picking up on something left unsaid. The conversation that never happened. He didn't say it outright, but it was like, "Look, man, I'm not rushing you, but 30 grand is a serious amount of money, and if you don't pay up, I'll have to find another way to resolve this." Was it a threat? No, but the tone was all business, decidedly unfriendly. I felt a connection between the pressure of the debt and the talk about Anna. Couldn't explain it logically, just a gut feeling.
Mike drops a bombshell about my wife, then immediately brings up the money, as if he's laying the groundwork, unsettling me, before hitting me where it hurts. I got home. Anna was in the living room, ironing laundry. The TV was on a music channel, and she was humming along to herself. She turned, asked how fishing was, if I caught anything. I lied, said yeah, released a couple of small bass. She smiled, "Good for you," and went back to ironing. I stood in the doorway, watching her. A normal scene. My wife ironing, humming, calm, domestic. No sign she was used to living alone, even though she was married. Maybe Mike's blowing this out of proportion. Maybe Natalie just imagined things. Women always blow things out of proportion. I almost convinced myself. Monday at work, I got slammed.
Vadim sent over edits for the presentation. 26 points. 26. Igor called me into his office and explained, no sugarcoating it, that if the client didn't approve the concept by Friday, the project would go to Jean from the parallel department. Jean, by the way, is 6 years younger than me and has only been with the agency for a year and a half. It stung, but there was nothing to do but get to it. I dug in, went through every single point, worked until 9, then 10. Then I realized if I didn't leave right then, I'd fall asleep at my desk. I got home around 10:30. The apartment was dark, just a nightlight in the hall. Anna was already asleep. A note on the kitchen counter. Soup in the fridge, heated up. The letters were even, neat, almost printed. I stood there, the note in my hand, remembering. She used to leave notes with little doodles, crooked hearts, signed "Yours, Anna," with an exclamation mark. Once she even drew a cat because she knew I loved cats. And now, soup in the fridge. Period. Information conveyed. Dry, to the point, not a single extra letter. I didn't eat the soup. I left the apartment, went down to the parking lot, and got in my car. Didn't start the engine, just sat there. The lot was empty, yellow streetlights casting long shadows. On the playground, a swing creaked in the wind. I sat for 20 minutes, then reached into the glove compartment An old pack of cigarettes was still there. I'd quit 3 years ago, but never threw out the pack. Some kind of superstition.
I pulled out a cigarette, rolled it between my fingers, lit it, took a drag. My head swam. I wasn't used to it. I coughed, tossed the butt out the window. 3 years ago, I quit smoking. 3 years ago, according to Mike, Anna stopped being herself. Coincidence or not? I couldn't connect those dots back then. It just struck me that the number was the same. I went back upstairs, lay down. Anna was on her side of the bed, facing the wall. 30 centimeters of mattress separated us, and an entire chasm I was only just beginning to notice. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I worked like a demon on that presentation. Vadim approved 18 points out of 26. I refined the rest on the fly. Igor had softened, but gave me a warning. Friday's the cutoff.
If the client greenlights it, the contract's yours. If not, Jack. He was hardly ever home, left early, came back late. Anna lived her own life. Work, home, TV shows, sleep, like a well-oiled machine, without a hitch. Without me, really. I fit into her routine like a piece of furniture. I'd come home, eat, go to bed, leave. She never asked where I'd been, never waited up, never called. One Thursday evening, I went into the kitchen late for a glass of water, caught my reflection in the window. A guy, 35, crumpled t-shirt, bags under his eyes. Standing in my own apartment, I felt like a guest. When did this happen? When did my home stop being my home and just become an address where I came to sleep? There was no answer, but the question wouldn't let go, and that was new.
I'd never asked myself such questions before. I just lived my life, worked, provided, figured that was enough. Maybe I really believed it, or maybe I just didn't want to dig, because I instinctively felt there was something deep down I didn't want to confront. The idea hit me on a Wednesday. I was at work, finishing up the last edits for Mr. Miller, and suddenly I thought, when was the last time Anna and I actually went somewhere, just the two of us? Not grocery shopping, not to Steve and Natalie's for a barbecue, but just us, as a couple, as husband and wife. I couldn't remember, and that in itself was an answer. That evening, I suggested, hey, let's take off for the weekend, get out of town. There's a hotel on a lake a couple of hours away.
A room with the view of the water, quiet, woods, like we used to do. Anna pulled herself away from her phone, looked at me, held my gaze for a second, then shrugged and said, okay, if you want. Not, yes, great, let's go. Not, oh, how wonderful, I've wanted to do that for ages. Just, okay, if you want. As if I'd suggested stopping by the pharmacy on the way home. But I decided to ignore it. Maybe she just wasn't expecting it. Maybe she'd be happy once she saw the place. We left Saturday morning. The hotel was small, with wooden cabins by the lake, pines, a path down to the water. It was beautiful. I'd booked a room with a balcony, ordered dinner at the hotel restaurant. I was trying, really trying. On a walk along the shore, I tried to joke.
Told a story about how Tony from the auto shop last week confused antifreeze with windshield wiper fluid and poured it into the reservoir. It was funny, right? Anna offered a faint smile. She walked politely beside me, hands in her jacket pockets, looking at the water. There was only about 1.5 feet between us, but it felt like I was walking with a hitchhiker I'd picked up, now in an awkward silence. At dinner, I tried to get her to talk. I remembered how we met. Steve had thrown a birthday party at his cabin back then, and Anna came with Natalie, wearing a white dress with a braid over her shoulder. I walked up to her then and blurted out something about her looking like an elementary school teacher. Terrible, stupid thing to say.
But she laughed, not out of politeness, but a genuine head-thrown-back laugh, and I was gone. As I told the story, Anna listened with a faint smile, but her eyes were like glass. She looked at me, yet seemed to be seeing something behind me, or nothing at all, just waiting for me to finish. Later that night, in the room, I reached for her. Carefully, gently, I ran my hand over her shoulder. Anna subtly pulled away and whispered quietly, Please, not tonight. I'm tired from the drive. Her voice was flat, devoid of irritation or apology. A simple statement of fact. Tired. Period. I lay on my back, staring at the wooden ceiling, a single beam running down the middle. Outside, the lake glittered under the moonlight. Beauty all around, yet a hollow ache settled deep inside me.
7 years with this woman, and for the first time, I felt like a stranger in her presence. Not unwanted, not even unwelcome, but just a bystander, like a seatmate on a long-haul flight. The next morning, we went down to the common room for breakfast. A buffet spread, coffee and insulated turafes, baskets of pastries. We found a table by the window. At the next table, a couple sat. Both looked to be in their 50s, maybe older. He refilled her coffee. She laughed at something he'd whispered in her ear. Then he reached over and brushed a strand of hair from her face. A simple, fleeting gesture. She took his hand and held it against her cheek. I watched them, racking my brain, trying to remember the last time Anna had laughed like that with me.
Not a polite smile, but a genuine, open, hearty laugh. I couldn't. The last clear memory I had was her cackling at me trying to assemble an IKEA bookshelf, ending up with 14 spare parts. That was 5 years ago. 5 years without her laughter, and I hadn't even noticed. The drive back, I turned on the radio, but Anna asked me to turn it off. She just sat there, staring out the side window. Trees, fields, small towns flashed by. Not a word. I stayed silent too. 2 people in one car, with nothing to say. Or perhaps too much to say, but neither of us knew how to start. As we neared the city, a sprawling metropolitan area, far from the quiet Midwest towns we'd driven through, my phone rang. The bank.
A manager, with a polite but formal tone, explained that due to 2 overdue payments on our renovation loan, the bank was considering an early recall of a significant portion of the principal. Not the whole loan, but a substantial part. He asked me to come into the branch on a weekday to discuss a payment plan. I listened, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, feeling another problem pile onto the existing anxieties in my head. We'd taken out the loan for the house renovation about 18 months ago. The monthly payment was over $2,000. I'd paid late for the last 2 months, the money getting diverted to other pressing expenses. Now the bank was getting twitchy. Legally, they had every right to demand early repayment if the payment schedule was systematically violated.
I knew that. I'd read the contract meticulously back when we signed, but it was one thing to know it, another entirely to get a call and be hit with the fact. Anna sat beside me and heard the entire conversation. She didn't ask a single thing. Not what the call was about, not if everything was okay, not how much we owed, nothing. At home, we unloaded the bags in silence. Anna took hers and went into the bathroom, closing the door. I stood in the hallway with a grocery bag and heard her speaking quietly to someone on the phone. Her voice was muffled, the words indistinguishable, but the intonation was alive, warm, a tone I hadn't heard from her in ages. And then it hit me. Not jealousy of another man, no, I didn't think there was anyone else. It was something different. Jealousy that to someone else she spoke with such a vibrant voice, to someone else she still shared something real, and to me, fine if you want. Okay, I'm tired from the drive. My jealousy wasn't of a person, but of a fact. The fact that Anna was still capable of warmth, just not with me. That night I lay awake in the dark. Anna had long since fallen asleep. I replayed everything that had accumulated in my mind over the past few weeks. Mike's words, Mom's hints, the office party, the fancy dinners, the hotel stays, her complete indifference to everything I did. And then it clicked. 3 years ago, I got a new phone. I gave my old one to Anna as a spare, just in case. She thanked me, tucked it into a drawer. 3 years ago. That's when everything changed.
Mom said it started 2 years ago, so by then things were already going south. Steve hinted, Natalie knows. The phone. The old phone. What was on it? My texts. My conversations. With whom? With other guys. With colleagues. With my ex, Christine. I sat down on the bed. My heart pounded. I couldn't quite remember what I'd written, but it felt like a key had almost turned in a lock, but not all the way. Something was missing. I had to find that phone. I had to look. I drove to Mom's after work, unannounced. Mary opened the door, saw me, and her brow furrowed immediately. Not out of annoyance, but because she sensed her son wasn't just dropping by for pie. We sat in the kitchen. She set down a plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes, just like when I was a kid.
I picked at it with my fork, silent. Then I took a deep breath and came right out with it. Mom, something's wrong with Anna and me. I don't know what, but it's wrong. It has been for a while. Mom sat across from me, folded her hands on the table, paused the way she does, and began to speak. Anna, it turns out, had visited her a month ago, alone. She brought a jar of her homemade peach jam, the kind she makes every summer. She stayed for about 3 hours. They drank coffee, talked about nothing much, but Mom noticed her eyes were red. Not that she'd cried in front of her, no, but it was clear she had before she arrived or on the way. I asked why she hadn't said anything. Mom gave me that look that makes you want to sink through the floor, and replied, "Would you have listened? 2 years ago you brushed it off. I was afraid you'd do the same now." I had no comeback. Then she added softly, "Anna says she feels frozen inside. Not angry, not hurt, but just frozen. When someone's cold on the outside, they shiver, they bundle up. But when they're cold inside, they just get quiet, too quiet. And according to Mom, this didn't start yesterday." I drove home, replaying it all. 3 years ago. Something happened 3 years ago. Anna changed. Mom saw it, Natalie knew, Steve let it slip. Everyone around me saw it, except for me, because I wasn't looking. 3 years ago, I got a new phone. I gave the old one to Anna. On that old phone were all my texts, everything, including my conversations with Christine, my ex, who I dated before Anna. We broke up 6 months before the wedding. Nothing dramatic, no big fight. We just drifted apart. But the texts were still there. As I drove, I tried to remember what exactly I'd written to Christine. We'd kept in touch for a while after the breakup. It took someone else just 5 seconds to see what I'd missed for 3 years. My wife wasn't even jealous. This wasn't a gift. It was a condemnation. That evening, I didn't go home. I went to the garage, to my dad's old Harley. Getting my hands easy, my mind cleared. I started to put the pieces together. The chronology. 3 years ago, that fall, I got a new phone. I gave my old one to Anna. A couple of months later, winter, my mom mentioned Anna seemed down. I just brushed it off. Gradually, the little notes disappeared, the quick hugs, the laughter. Everything faded out smoothly, like the sound in your headphones when the battery dies. Not abruptly, but imperceptibly. And I just accepted that silence as normal. I had to find that phone. I got home late. Anna was already in bed. I climbed up to the attic storage, found the box with old stuff, chargers, cables, cases, and there it was, my old smartphone. The screen was a spider web of cracks. The volume button was gone. I found a charger, plugged it in, waited. The indicator light blinked, then died. Tried again. Nothing. The screen wouldn't come on. The device was dead, but I knew the data inside might still be salvageable. The next day, during my lunch break, I drove to a repair shop right across from work.
The tech, a kid in his early 20s with a faded band t-shirt, turned the phone over in his hand and clucked his tongue. Said the main board looked okay. He could probably extract the data. 2 days, $75. I left the phone and walked out. 2 days of waiting. In the meantime, a text came in from Mike. Not a call this time, not a gentle nudge. A text, dry as a legal document. "Hey man, I need an answer on that loan by the end of the month. $4,000, or I'm gonna have to handle it through some connections. No offense, but I got a family to feed too." Through connections. I reread that line for a good 30 seconds. Mike wasn't some mobster or loan shark. He was an electrician at the plant. But he did have a lawyer friend. He'd mentioned it once.
And a verbal agreement, if it could be smartly presented with witnesses, could turn into a real headache. I knew enough about the law to understand the score. Without a formal IOU, without a contract, trying to collect a debt through the courts was practically impossible. But Mike could apply pressure in other ways, through mutual friends, through my reputation, through Natalie and Anna. Petty, disgusting, but damn effective. I pushed it aside. Right now, there was a more important task at hand. That evening, Anna had gone to her late shift. A client had requested a reschedule. I sat down at the home laptop. It was her old machine, usually sitting on the kitchen counter, where she'd look up recipes and scroll through social media. I'm not proud of what I did, but I did it. I opened it up, scrolled through, nothing out of the ordinary. TV shows, recipes, nail art groups. Then I noticed a hidden folder. Not password protected, just buried deep in the file structure. No name, just a string of numbers. I opened it. Inside were scanned documents, official forms. A petition for the division of marital assets, filled out in her own handwriting. Court address, details of both parties, a full inventory. The condo, the car, all the major appliances. The date on the documents, exactly 3 years ago to the day. She had been planning to file for divorce, to divide our property 3 years ago. She'd prepared everything, meticulously, expertly. Clearly she'd consulted with someone. But she hadn't filed. For 3 years, those papers had sat in that hidden folder.
3 years she'd lived with me. Cooked dinner, watched my shirts, gone to work, lay down on her side of the bed. All this time, the divorce papers were sitting ready on her laptop. I closed the laptop. My hands weren't shaking from fear, but from something else, from the gut-wrenching realization that the ice beneath me had cracked, and I hadn't even known I was standing on it. She was ready to leave, but she hadn't. Why? What or who stopped her? The repair shop called at lunchtime while I was in a meeting. It was an unfamiliar number, so I dismissed it. They called back a minute later. I stepped out into the hallway and answered. The tech, a guy in a stretched-out t-shirt, cheerfully reported. They'd recovered the data, the board was fine. Everything was saved to a flash drive, ready for pickup. I begged off work, claiming I had to deal with a bank loan. I drove over, picked up the flash drive, and got back in my car in the mall parking lot. People ambled by with shopping bags, carts clattered. Someone was arguing on the phone. Just a typical weekday, but my palms were sweaty, and my heart was pounding like before a final exam. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. I always keep my work laptop with me. Archives, folders, photos, notes, apps, and messages. Lots of messages. Work stuff with the guys, with my mom, and one with Christina. Christina. We dated for 2 years before Anna. Beautiful, sharp, with a fiery personality. We broke up because we were both too stubborn. Neither of us would back down. A classic story.
After the breakup, we still messaged for a while, out of habit. She'd ask, "How are you?" I'd reply. Then I met Anna, and the messages gradually tapered off. But before the wedding, Christina wrote. She congratulated me, asked if I was happy, and I replied. I opened that message thread and started to read. The first few messages were normal. Yes, I'm getting married. Yes, she's great. But then Christina started to dig. She was good at it. She asked what made Anna so much better than her. I wrote, with her, it's calm. She's dependable. You can build a life with her without looking back. Christina asked point blank, but do you love her? And I replied, word for word. Love is for kids. I need a foundation. With Anna, I know I'll have that foundation. I read it, then reread it. My words again. Definitely mine. I remembered the style, the habit of putting a period at the end of every sentence. My words, my logic, my cold calculation. Not a single word of love, not one. Nothing about the way Anna's eyes crinkle when she laughs, about how she tucks her hair behind her ear when she's nervous, about how she spilled a glass of juice all over herself on our first date, and we both just cracked up for 15 minutes. Nothing. Just dependable. A foundation. Something to build like a project, a business plan. Here's the resource, here's the investment, here's the expected outcome. I looked at the date, a month before our wedding. Then I did the math. I'd given Anna my old phone 3 years ago.
She must have turned it on, poked around, found and read the exact same words I was reading now. But for her, these weren't just casual words in an old chat. For her, this was the answer to a question she was maybe even afraid to ask herself. Does he love me? The answer, in black and white, no, he doesn't. Just convenient, dependable, a foundation. I had given her that phone myself, handed it to her with my own 2 hands, not because I wanted her to find it, but because I hadn't even remembered what was on it, because it just didn't matter to me. Messages with an X before the wedding. So what? That's what I thought back then. Nothing scandalous, no cheating, no dirty pictures, nothing like that. Just the truth about, I found out how I truly felt about the woman who became my wife.
And that truth turned out to be more devastating than any betrayal. I got home. Anna was at work. I sat on the hallway bench, still in my jacket and shoes, phone in hand, staring at that message thread. I just sat there, staring at the wall. So that was it. She hadn't been jealous, not because she trusted me, but because she just didn't care anymore. 3 years ago, she found out her husband didn't marry her for love, and from that day on, she started to fade. Quietly, no drama, no tears in front of me. She just shut something off inside. And I, who'd prided myself on her composure, had spent 3 years living with a woman for whom I was nothing more than a habit. My first impulse was to bolt to her work, tell her I was an idiot, that it wasn't true, that those words meant nothing.
But I stopped myself. I clenched my jaw and thought, those words weren't a lie. Back then, before the wedding, that's genuinely what I thought. Marry someone steady, build a solid home, save love for the romantics. If I run to her now and say it's all different, that would be the lie, and I don't lie. At least, I try not to. No, I had to figure out first what I actually felt, what I had felt, and if there was anything there besides routine and gratitude for a hot dinner every night. That evening I called Steve. I don't know why, maybe because there was no one else. I started, from a distance, no names, no details.
If a guy finds out a woman knows something about him that killed her feelings and she kept quiet about it for 3 years, what does that mean? Steve went silent for a long time on the other end, then answered softly, without his usual booming laugh. It means she's stronger than you, buddy. And after a pause, he added in a clipped, businesslike tone, so, what's your move? You gonna let this keep dragging on? I expect you to have a plan by tomorrow. I hung up, but kept the phone to my ear for a good 30 seconds, even though the call had already ended. Steve had answered too quickly, too precisely, like someone who'd already thought about this, who knew exactly what I was asking. And then another picture started forming in my mind.
Steve had introduced me to Anna at his birthday party. He was still single then. Natalie showed up later, about 6 months after. But that night, when I walked up to Anna with a dumb joke about a teacher, Steve had been standing a little to the side, watching her. I hadn't thought anything of it then. Guy watches a pretty girl, what's the big deal? But now, connecting the dots, I was starting to understand. Steve hadn't introduced us by accident, or maybe he had, and regretted it later. And then he found out about that message thread through Natalie, and for 3 years he'd stewed on it, kept it bottled up. He'd been pressuring me for that $5 grand, not because he actually needed the money, but because he was pissed at me, for Anna's sake. That evening, I came home.
Anna was in her armchair, reading a book. I didn't turn on the TV, didn't pull out my phone, didn't head to the kitchen. I just sat in the armchair opposite her, silently. She read. I sat. A minute, 2, 5. Silence. But it was a different kind of silence. Not the empty, familiar quiet we'd lived in for 3 years. I wasn't trying to fill it with words, wasn't pushing questions or conversation. I was trying to hear it, this silence, to understand what was in it. Anna slowly lifted her eyes from the book, looked at me for a second, maybe a second and a half. She didn't say a word, just went back to reading. That single second burned more fiercely than any accusation. Night. 3rd floor balcony, overlooking the courtyard. The playground below was empty.
a single street lamp flickering.
I leaned on the railing, chain smoking, one cigarette after another. I'd bought the pack on the way home, hadn't touched one in 3 years. But I wasn't smoking from nerves. I smoked because I needed something to occupy my hands while my brain sorted through 3 years of memories. Not circling endlessly, no, but filing through specific episodes, like opening folders on a hard drive. A year ago, I suggested we get a dog, a golden retriever. I'd always loved them since I was a kid. Anna just shrugged. "If you want to," she'd said. I figured, okay, she's not keen, we can wait. But she never really wanted one. Didn't care if it was a dog, cat, or hamster. Whatever, she'd say. A year and a half ago, I invited her to my college buddy Victor's birthday dinner.
Restaurant, couples, the whole 9 yards. Anna declined, said she had a headache. I went alone, drank too much, sang karaoke, acted like an idiot. Came home, she was asleep. Not a word in the morning. I remember thinking then, that's why I love her. No interrogations. It hit me now. She hadn't come because she didn't care where I was or who I was with. 2 years ago, I'd kiss her forehead goodnight. A little ritual we had. She'd pull away, almost imperceptibly. I put it down to her being tired. But she wasn't pulling away from tiredness. She was pulling away from me. 3 years of the same signs, and I'd read them all backward. Calmness instead of indifference. Trust instead of emptiness. A perfect marriage instead of ashes.
I finished the cigarette, snuffed it out on the railing, flicked it into a tin can. My hands smelled of tobacco. I went back inside. Anna was in the bedroom, door closed. I stood in the dark hallway, making a decision. I wouldn't say a word to her, wouldn't try to explain myself. I would do. Because, as it turned out, my words only made things worse. The next morning, I got up early and brewed strong coffee in the French press, just the way she liked it. I placed the mug on her right stand beside the bed. Anna opened her eyes, saw it, froze for a second, then thanked me quietly, reservedly. I walked out without looking back, didn't wait for a reaction, didn't beg for a smile. I just did it and left. At work, I crushed my project. Mr. Henderson, the car dealer, messaged that morning, approved the concept, signing the contract. My boss, Mr. Davidson, called me into his office, shook his hand, called me a top performer. A hefty bonus was coming at the end of the month. Greg from the next department gave me a sour look, but I didn't even gloat. I was beyond that. The bonus landed a week later. I knew exactly what I'd spend it on. 6 months ago, even before all this, Anna had casually mentioned seeing a professional nail extension kit at the salon. German-made, expensive. The full setup, lamp, drill, all the materials. She'd said it offhand, not asking for it, just mentioning it. I'd stayed silent, as usual. Heard it and forgot. Not this time. I drove to that salon, found the kit. Nearly $3,000, almost a third of my bonus. I bought it, brought it home. Anna was in the kitchen, reheating dinner. I placed the box on the table, big, with a shiny logo. She looked at the box, then at me, opened it, saw what was inside, and went silent. Then she quietly asked, "Why?" I replied, "Because you mentioned it 6 months ago, and I'm only hearing it now." She stood there, holding the box, her face unmoving. Then she carefully put the kit down, on the table, then turned and walked into the bedroom. I heard the click of the lock. I was left alone in the kitchen. Just me, dinner, and that closed door. I reheated the food, ate, and washed the dishes. Still not a sound from her room. I didn't try to force my way in. I knew then that the gift wasn't just about the set. It was about me finally hearing from her after 3 years, and how for her, that wasn't a comfort, but a sharp pain. Because if I could hear her now, it meant I could have reached out sooner, but chose not to. 2 days later, Steve texted, "Let's meet. Got something important to discuss." He picked a diner off Main Street, in the heart of downtown. When I got there, Steve wasn't alone. A guy in his late 30s, early 40s sat next to him. Suit, briefcase, glasses. "My lawyer," Steve said. "He's here to help us formalize the debt." Something turned over in my gut. Not fear, just a cold, hard anger, purely masculine. Steve had waited 4 years for 10 grand based on a handshake deal. Now, out of nowhere, he brings a lawyer.
It wasn't because he desperately needed the cash. It was about twisting the knife, showing off his power, making it clear who was in charge. The lawyer droned on about pre-litigation settlements, backdated promissory notes, witness statements. I listened, weighing my options. Legally, without a written contract, no signed IOU, no bank transfer record, he could only prove this debt through witnesses, and there were no witnesses to that conversation, just Steve and me, face to face. In court, it would be my word against his. But I wasn't about to welch on a deal. A debt's a debt. I'd given him my word. But something else was really burning me up. I looked at Steve and said aloud, "You got me that car wash client 4 years ago."
One phone call, one introduction, and for that you want $10,000? That's not a debt, Steve. That's a shakedown. Steve's face flushed crimson. The lawyer, now a human barrier between us, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Steve started to boil over. I could see his jaw clenching. Then he blurted out, "You, Mark, you didn't even deserve your own wife. I practically handed Anna to you on a silver platter at my birthday party. I specifically invited her so you two could meet. And what did you do? You treated her like a maid. Reliable, your rock, convenient. Did you ever once stop to think about who she actually was? Or is a woman just a role to fill for you?" The lawyer cleared his throat and pretended to study the menu.
Steve was still fuming, but I just sat there, trying to process it all. He knew. Steve knew about the messages. Natalie had told him, and Natalie had known about Tanya. The whole ugly chain was connected. And all these years, while I had been living in my cozy little bubble, Steve had been simmering with resentment towards me, over a woman he clearly once wanted for himself, a woman I got and didn't appreciate. I stood up from the table. "Sorry for wasting your time," I told the lawyer, without looking at Steve. Then I walked out. Outside, I pulled out my phone. My hands were buzzing, not from a fight, but from holding one back.
I wanted to go back in there and tell him everything, that friends don't treat each other like that if he knew, he should have said it to my face instead of hitting me with a financial low blow, that real men settle things straight up, not through lawyers and some petty gossip. But I didn't go back, because in one thing, Steve was absolutely right. I hadn't appreciated her, and that truth stung more than his betrayal. Later that night, around 9, I was out in the garage, aimlessly sorting through tools, when my phone rang. It was Natalie, Steve's wife. We'd never really clicked, never spoken much beyond pleasantries. She only ever called if she needed me to pass a message to Steve. Her voice was low, fast, as if she was afraid someone might overhear. She told me one thing.
Anna had cried in her kitchen 3 years ago, showed up unannounced, sat down, and bawled for 2 hours. She talked about the messages, the words, how she felt like a piece of furniture in her own home. Natalie had wanted to call me then, but Anna made her promise. "Don't get involved. Don't say anything. Not to me, not to anyone." And from that day, Natalie said, Anna hadn't shed a single tear in 3 years. Natalie added that when a woman cries, she's still hurting. When she stops, it means everything has burned out. And in her opinion, that's far worse. She hung up. I was sitting in the garage, surrounded by wrenches and greasy rags, and it felt like someone had screwed a bolt into my chest and cranked it twice.
3 years ago, my wife was crying her eyes out in someone else's kitchen because of my words, and I was probably right there in that same garage, turning wrenches and thinking how good I had it. For 2 days, I walked around, preparing, not for a fight, not for an argument, but for a real conversation, the first in 3 years, maybe even in 7. I knew one thing, not at home. You don't talk about things like this in the kitchen, between the kettle and the fridge. Definitely not in the bedroom. We needed a place where the walls didn't feel like they were closing in or remind us of 3 years of silence. Saturday morning, as Anna was getting ready for her day shift, I stopped her in the hallway. I asked if she could call out of work today, find someone to cover.
"I want to drive out of town together, just to drive, like we used to." She looked at me for a long time, not with suspicion, but with something like tired curiosity. Then she pulled out her phone, sent a text, put it away, and just said, "All right, let's go." I drove the car south on the highway, not really thinking about the route. Or rather, I was, but not admitting it to myself, because my hands just turned the wheel at the right spot. And 40 minutes later, we pulled over on the side of the road by that field, the very one where, 7 years ago that spring, I'd pulled a ring box from my jacket pocket and blurted out something like, "So you gonna marry me? Mr. Romantic over here, what can I say?" Anna had laughed then and said yes, without even opening the box. Then she opened it, saw the ring, and laughed again, because the stone was microscopic. It was all I could afford. Now the field was green, something already going to seed. I cut the engine. Silence. Just the birds and the wind. Anna looked out the window. I could tell she recognized the spot, because her chin trembled, but she didn't say anything. And I began, not with excuses, not with apologies, but with a fact. I told her I'd found the old phone, the one I'd given her 3 years ago. I took it to a repair shop, had the data pulled, found my messages with Christine, read every single word, and realized she must have read them too. Then, 3 years ago, Anna had just been silent, staring out at the field through the windshield. A minute passed, then 2. I didn't rush her. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush, didn't try to fill the silence, didn't jump in with my versions or explanations. Then she turned. Her eyes were dry, no tears, no anger. She confirmed it. She'd found them 2 months after I'd given her the device. She was charging it to use as an alarm clock. The phone turned on and she saw the notification. She opened it. She read it. Everything. Not just the texts with Tiffany, but everything. But those texts. The words about a stable, comfortable life and a good investment, about a love that for young people was a slap in the face. 4 years of marriage by then. She continued. For 4 years I thought we were a family. That you, even if you weren't a poet or a romantic, loved me. In your own quiet, masculine way. But it turned out I was just a practical choice, like a car with a good cost-benefit analysis. The first month after she found them, she couldn't eat a thing. Food just wouldn't go down. She lost almost 10 pounds. Colleagues at work kept telling her how great she looked, how trim, but she was just starving herself. The second month, she debated, leave or stay. She consulted with a lawyer. A friend of a friend gave her a referral, and she got all the papers ready for a separation. The condo was bought during the marriage, so half was hers. The truck was in his name, but she didn't even want it. She just wanted a clean break, no drama. The third month, she didn't file. She put the documents back in a folder and just shut down. She called it losing feeling. Not on purpose, not out of spite. She just woke up one morning and realized she didn't care anymore. Where he went, who he talked to, when he'd be home, it didn't matter. And from that day on, she lived like that for 3 years. I listened, not interrupting once. My hands were on the wheel, the engine off, windows cracked. The smell of the fields, damp earth, warm grass, and her voice, even without a hint of strain, as if she were telling a story about someone else's life. And that very calmness made it heavier than any shouting. I asked only one thing. Why didn't you leave? She paused, then answered simply. I waited. I waited for you to realize that if you loved me even a little, you'd notice I wasn't laughing anymore. That I wasn't holding you tight, that I turned away at night, that I stopped leaving you notes. I waited for you to ask what was wrong, to see the difference between before and after. You never did. 3 years. I sat there, feeling something break inside me, not with a sudden crash, but slowly, heavily, like an old brick wall being torn down, brick by heavy brick. Each of her words was a brick pulled from the foundation of my belief that I was a good husband. I wanted to say that I was different back then, before the wedding, that those words weren't the whole truth. But I stopped myself, because those words were the truth. Back then, I really did marry her because she was reliable, because I felt secure with her, because she was my anchor. Lying to her, saying it wasn't true, was pointless. She'd seen it in black and white. Instead, I said something else. That in 7 years, something had grown. Something I didn't even have words for because I'd never tried to find them. That I didn't know if it was love back then, but what I felt now, understanding that I could lose her, that wasn't about convenience or security. Anna looked out at the field. The stalks swayed in the wind. Then she told me about Steve. That he knew, through Natalie, that he was pressing me for that $3,000, not because he needed the cash, but because he was furious on her behalf. Anna wasn't surprised at all. She answered calmly that Steve had called her 2 years ago, offering to help her leave. Said if she needed a place to stay temporarily, he'd find one. If she needed a lawyer, he'd arrange it. She'd refused. I stared at her, trying to process it. My buddy, who hung out in my garage, drank beer with me. He'd shared whiskey with me on fishing trips, slapped me on the back, called me bro. 2 years ago, he called my wife, offered to help her leave me. He didn't save me, didn't warn me, didn't tell me to my face. He acted behind my back, and I'm only finding this out now, not from him, but from her. I asked why she turned Mike down. Anna just shrugged, said it wouldn't feel right. If she was going to leave, she had to do it on her own, not with the help of a guy who had eyes for her. So she saw it too. Mike's gaze. And she stayed silent.
Everyone else knew. Everyone else was silent. They knew, and they stayed quiet. And I had been sitting in the middle of this conspiracy of silence, convinced I had the perfect life. The drive back, the radio was off. Anna stared out the window. I stared at the road. We didn't speak. But this silence was different. Heavy. Thick. Like the air after a summer storm. It wasn't empty. It held something. Maybe the start of something. Maybe the end. I couldn't tell. We got home. Went inside. I expected her to retreat to her room, close the door, like she usually did every evening. But she didn't. She walked into the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and sat at the table. I sat across from her. She stared into her glass for a long time, then slowly lifted her eyes and spoke quietly, carefully choosing her words. She said she didn't know if she loved me anymore, that for 3 years she'd been living with this feeling that everything inside her had frozen solid, and that tonight, for the first time in 3 years, she felt something, that my words had finally gotten through to her, and she didn't know if that was a good thing or a terrifying one, because if she started to feel again, it might hurt, and she'd been hiding from that pain for 3 years. I sat and listened, not because I had nothing to say, but because for the first time, I understood. Now wasn't the time to talk. It was the time to be present. Just be there, and not screw it up. Outside, darkness fell, and the yard light flickered on. In the kitchen, only the warm, yellow light from the lamp above the stove was on. We sat facing each other, like two strangers getting to know each other for the first time after 7 years of marriage. A month passed. I won't lie and say an idyll descended. It didn't. We didn't fall into each other's arms, didn't book a second honeymoon, didn't go pick out new wedding rings. None of that. But something had shifted. Small, almost imperceptible if you weren't looking closely. Anna started occasionally asking about my day at work. Not every day, maybe every few days. A quick, passing question over breakfast or in the evening. But she asked, and she waited for an answer. Not like before, when she'd nod automatically. She truly listened. I started noticing things that used to fly right past me, like how she'd rub her wrist after a long shift. Her work is hard on her hands. That on Thursdays, she came home later and looked completely drained, because Thursdays were her busiest day. That she didn't like having the overhead lights on in the apartment. She preferred the warm, subdued light of a lamp. 7 years living side by side, and I was only seeing these things now. I restructured our loan, went to the bank, sat there for 2 hours, filled out a mountain of paperwork. The manager pushed back, claiming the terms were standard,
a revision impossible.
I pulled out a printout of competitor interest rates and calmly explained that I could easily move the loan to another bank through refinancing, and they'd lose a client. The manager went to his superior. I came back 20 minutes later with a new payment plan. The interest rate was the same, but they'd extended the term, and the monthly payments were lower. I could finally breathe again. Then I sold my dad's old motorcycle, a vintage Harley-Davidson he'd been tinkering with for years in the garage. I found a buyer through an online forum, a serious collector of classic bikes. He gave me a fair price, $4,500 for it in that condition. It was a good deal, honest. The money went straight to paying down the loan. Was it painful? You bet it was.
That was Dad's bike, the last thing left of him, besides the old cabin out by the lake. I stood by the garage, watching the buyer load the frame onto his trailer. My hands ached to tell him, wait, I changed my mind. But I didn't, because a motorcycle is just metal. Dad's memory lives in me, not in a piece of steel, and debts need to be paid. Dad would have understood. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy, never sentimental. Things with Mike were finally over. No big blowout, no shouting match. It was worse, a notary public. I went to his place myself, not some fancy cafe with lawyers, but right to his garage. I laid an envelope on his workbench.
Inside were $6,500, everything I could scrape together immediately, and a carefully worded promissory note detailing the remaining payment schedule and signed by both of us. I suggested we get it notarized right then and there. Mike looked at the envelope, then the note, then at me. He was about to say something, but I cut him off. I told him I'd pay the debt in full, on schedule, and after that, we'd be nothing to each other. No hard feelings, no explanations. Mike's face flushed crimson, but he signed the note. We had it notarized a week later. I paid the remaining $6,500 in 2 installments over the next month. Bank transfers, screenshots, everything documented, man to man, but without a trace of friendship.
Our friendship had died in that cafe, the moment he brought his lawyer and spat out all the bitterness he'd been simmering. Sometimes I wondered if Mike could have been a better husband to Anna. Maybe he could have. At least he saw her as a person, not just a function. But that wasn't his story to tell. It was mine, and I was the one who had to answer for it. Mom called at the end of the month. Her voice was soft, content. She said Anna had come to visit her again, alone, just like before. But this time she talked more, not just sitting quietly, but telling her about work, about a client who wanted a landscape painted on her nails, about a new colleague at the salon. Just small, everyday things. But Mom heard the most important thing in those small details. Anna was starting to open up.
Not to me yet, but at least to her. At the end of the call, Mom added quietly, "Don't rush her, son. I promised." At Mom's cabin, the sauna had been unfinished since last year. Dad had started it, then got sick, then he was gone. I took it on myself. Every weekend I drove out there. Rafters, siding, insulation, benches, all by hand, no contractors, no help. Physical labor that left my back and arms numb by evening, but my head was clearer than ever. Planning a board, my thoughts lined up perfectly. Driving screws, I understood things that words couldn't quite capture. I finished it in 3 weeks. Calluses on my palms, a scraped elbow from a slipping plane, farmer tan stripes across my arms. Mom came to see it, stood in the doorway, ran her hand over a bench.
Your father would have approved. That's enough. Then, one ordinary Tuesday evening, nothing special about it. I was on the couch, scrolling through my phone, catching up on the news. Anna walked out of the bathroom, past me, then stopped short. She turned, took my hand, just held it, saying nothing. Her fingers were warm, a little damp from her shower. 5 seconds, maybe 6. Then she let go and went into the kitchen to do the dishes. 5 seconds. You know how sometimes a whole lifetime can be packed into a single gesture? That was it. I sat there, my hand still worn from hers, unable to move. Not from joy, but from a strange sort of caution, like someone had handed you something incredibly fragile and you were terrified to even breathe wrong.
The next day, alone in the quiet apartment, I finally did what I should have done ages ago. I opened my phone, found the old message thread with Christina, the one from before Anna and I got married. It was still there, archived in the Messenger app. I'd just never bothered to clear it out. I deleted every single message. All of it. A belated gesture, I suppose. Meaningless, maybe. But I needed to do it for myself. Not for Anna. She'd never know. For me. To finally close a chapter that should have ended years ago. That evening, we were in the kitchen. I was washing apples, she was slicing bread. A typical evening. And then she asked, with no warning, no preamble. She just turned, knife still in hand, and asked, "Did you ever actually love me?" Quietly.
Level, not accusatory, not desperate. Just the question that had hung between us for 7 years, finally spoken aloud. I froze. Apple in hand, water running from the faucet. I turned off the water, put down the apple, turned to her, and couldn't lie. No, I couldn't. Because enough was enough. Enough with the convenient words, the safe answers, I thought. I don't know if I loved you then. Honestly, I don't. Maybe what I felt was something else. Attachment, gratitude, comfort. I don't know what to call it. But now, yes. And it took almost losing everything for me to finally understand that. That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. Anna stood there, knife and bread still in hand, looking at me for a long time. I didn't look away, didn't try to guess what she was thinking. For the first time, I just stood there before her, open, no hidden agenda, no game plan. She didn't reply, didn't say, "Yes, I believe you," didn't say, "No, it's too late." She said nothing, but she didn't leave. She just stood there, a few feet from me, holding the bread and knife, in the kitchen we'd renovated on a loan, in the apartment where we'd lived like roommates for 3 years. She stood there, silent. And in that silence, in just standing there together, there was more of an answer than in any words. Or was there? I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe tomorrow she'll walk out. Maybe in a month she'll find the strength to say it's too late. Maybe those divorce papers are still sitting in a hidden folder, waiting. Maybe she never deleted them. But maybe not.
Maybe we'll make it through. Not like in the movies where you hug and ride off into the sunset, but like in real life. Hard, slow, with setbacks and stretches of silence. Another step, then more silence. And maybe one day she'll take my hand again for 6 seconds, or 7, or 10. And maybe, someday, she won't let go. Second chances don't come with a guarantee. They come with a condition. Don't screw it up again. Don't fall asleep at the wheel. Whether I'm smart enough not to screw it up this time, that's not up to fate. That's a decision I make every day. Every morning when I brew her coffee. Every evening when I notice she's tired. Every single time I choose. It was a thought I couldn't shake. A wife who never got jealous, I used to think. That was a real godsend.
But as it turned out, the real blessing of fate is when you're handed a second chance, if you've got the good sense not to blow it. And whether you do have that sense, that's not up to fate anymore. That's a choice you make every single day.